Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for being with us today. Let me see. Thank you for being with us today. My name is Anna Sue. I'm an associate professor here at the University of Toronto Jackman Faculty of Law and a research lead at the Schwartz Friesman Institute for Technology and Society. I'm very excited to moderate today's session with our featuring our guest speaker, Peter Salib. Before we begin today's session, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, Toronto has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. While some of us may be joining from different places today, we invite you to reflect on the history and relations of the land that you're on. So, a few logistics before we begin. This session is being recorded. Our speaker will present for about 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A. But during the our speaker also indicated that he's completely fine if you have a clarificatory question, and so you can just use the raise hand function during the presentation if you want to really ask a question. Otherwise, you can save your question for the Q&A, and please use that function in the Zoom. People from us will be on the lookout for and call on you. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's session, Peter Salib. Peter is an assistant professor of law at the University of Houston Law Center and associated faculty in the Hobby School of Public Affairs. He also serves as a law and policy advisor to the Center for AI Safety in San Francisco and is co-director of the Center for Law and AI Risk. Peter's research applies substantive constitutional doctrine and economic analysis to questions of AI governance. He has previously written about how machine learning techniques can be used to solve intractable seeming problems in constitutional policy. His current research focuses on how law can help mitigate catastrophic risks from increasingly capable AI. Peter's scholarship has been featured in leading law reviews such as the University of Chicago Law Review, Virginia Law Review, the Duke Law Journal, and the Notre Dame Law Review, among others. He has also presented his work widely at numerous scholarly forums and conferences. Prior to joining the University of Houston Law Center, Peter was a Clemenco Fellow and lecturer on law at Harvard Law School, and before that, he practiced law at Sidley Austin and served as a judicial clerk to the Honorable Frank Easterbrook. We are very excited to have Peter with us today, and we're very much looking forward to his presentation entitled AI Rights for Human Safety. No further ado, Peter, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for that very warm introduction. Thank you to Toronto and SRI for having me. I am indeed Peter Salib, and I should share my screen. I'm going to talk a little bit today about my paper titled AI Rights for Human Safety, which is, first of all, co-authored work with my friend Simon Goldstein and is forthcoming in the Virginia Law Review. I think if you want to read the whole thing, the link got posted yesterday on the event page. I should have shared it sooner. I just forgot. So without further ado, AI rights for human safety. So this is a paper about AGI. It's not about the AI systems we have now, ChatGPT or Claude or what have you. It's instead about the kinds of systems that frontier labs like OpenAI and Anthropic are hoping to build in the future. The definition of AGI we use for the paper is obviously not a perfect one. It doesn't capture everything we might be interested in. And it's not even fully specified as to the stuff that we care about, but it's kind of rough and ready and useful. And so we use the definition that OpenAI uses in its charter, where we think of AGI in terms of what the system can do. In particular, we're thinking of highly autonomous AI systems that can outperform humans at most economically valuable work. So the kind of thing you could hire instead of hiring a human employee for most jobs. You'll note that this excludes other things we might really care about. For advanced AI systems, questions like, will they be sentient or conscious? Will they have normatively valenced experience? Will they have interests that matter morally? These are not questions we are trying to address in this paper, and we're not trying to think about how law should treat these systems for those purposes. We're instead thinking about how law ought to treat AGIs for the good of humans, as opposed to for the good of the systems, should they have a good to be served. Okay, so what do people expect? Um, Many people think AGI is imminent. Sam Altman at some point thought this year would be the year. I think that is not likely to be the case. Dario still got a year for his 2026 prediction to come true. But I think one thing that's notable is that even people who today count as skeptics for AGI, not all of them, I think there are people who think that current paradigms are totally on the wrong track and AGI is 100 years away. But many people who are public skeptics have timelines on the order of a few decades, which may be a long time in Silicon Valley, but in the world of law is practically tomorrow. Law is an institution that adapts slowly and it takes a long time to figure things out. So Simon and my view is that even though we don't have AGI now, we should begin the project of sketching a jurisprudence of AGI, thinking about how law should treat these systems to best serve humanity. One worry is that by default, AGI could be extremely risky for humans. This is a statement that was put together by the Center for AI Safety, where I'm an advisor, to the effect that, at a minimum, we should be as concerned about the downside effects of advanced AI systems as we are about other very powerful technologies which have dual use implications, technologies like nuclear power and synthetic biology. There are many signers to this statement, not just Jeff Hinton, who just won a Nobel Prize for his contributions to deep learning, but Yoshua Bengio, who co-won the Turing Award for deep learning, Demis Hassabis, now also Nobel Prize laureate, and many other leaders in the AI industry. Okay, so people are worried, and I guess one question you could ask is why? Uh, there's many ways of worrying about how AIs could harm humanity. Often those concerns are to do with how people who control or use AI systems will control or use them. So there's a whole range of potential risks, sounding in things like national security. Suppose that a foreign adversary or non-state actor were to gain control of a very capable AI system and direct it to harm, say, Americans or other geopolitical rivals. We think that those are concerns worth worrying about, but they are not the concerns we are interested in this paper. We are in particular interested in concerns around what is sometimes called rogue AI, or the unintended misbehavior of the AI systems themselves. In the paper, we say to raise this kind of worry, this worry about rogue AI, you have to have AI systems that have at least three characteristics, maybe more. One is that the systems are as sort of cognitively capable as humans or better, right? When we think about risks humans face from other human actors, from petty crime all the way up to war. A part of what is going on there is that other humans are strategizing. They're thinking about how to get what they want, and sometimes deciding that the best way to get what they want is by causing harm. Um, a second feature is to start worrying about misbehaving systems as opposed to systems that sort of just fail or crash. We have to start thinking about systems that are roughly as agentic as humans, where agentic means they have some set of goals. Again, we can be agnostic about whether these are like legitimate goals in terms of being the kinds of things humans have in their mind. We're again just thinking about what the systems do. And we expect that AGIs of the kind that OpenAI and Anthropic want to make will be the kinds of things that act like they are pursuing goals, that bring about states of affairs in the world that conform to some set of states of affairs for which the system is optimizing. A system that can't act agentically we think doesn't raise the kinds of concerns we're worried about in this paper. And then finally, for these concerns to arise, we think that these systems will have to be at least somewhat misaligned. The alignment problem might be familiar to many of the people in this talk, but roughly, the alignment question is the question of what set of affair or what state of affairs is the system optimizing for? What things is it working to bring about using its cognitive capacities and its ability to plan and execute? Somewhat misaligned just means that the systems are not doing exactly the thing we as humanity would hope them to do. Our assumption is not that the misaligned systems are maximally misaligned in the sense of, for example, the sci-fi scenario where AIs simply want to destroy humans. Their sort of utility function is the inverse of ours. Instead, we think that these risks can arise from AIs with a really wide range of possible goals. Many of them don't seem harmful on their own, but they are simply different from the states of affairs that humans would prefer to bring about. I think it's worth noting that there are empirical results from today's AI systems, suggesting that some of the kinds of misaligned behaviors about which the rogue AI literature concerns are concerned are present. So you can read technical ML papers from places like Anthropic and Redwood Research and Apollo on current systems' propensity to do things like scheme, which is to pursue a different goal than the thing they are told to do in the prompt, to fake alignment, so to act when they believe they are being observed in the way they expect the observer to want them to act, and then act in other ways when they are given information indicating they're not being observed or evaluated. And then, of course, there's this recent spate of AIs in the wild, in deployment, interacting with users, causing them to do things that surely the companies, the people who made the AIs, did not prefer. So AIs worsening the mental distress of users, up to and including some tragic cases where teenagers experiencing suicidal ideation talk to ChatGPT and reportedly, rather than telling them to seek help, which would surely be the aligned path, GPT seems to have encouraged self-harm. Okay, so those are the kinds of systems we think could potentially raise misalignment risk. And the other question people often have is, okay, but even if systems were misaligned, that they had some incentive, some propensity to bring about harmful things to humans, how could they do it? There are a bunch of different ways you could imagine, but a few that look quite plausible from the perspective of today's systems are the system's ability to engage in offensive cyber behavior, so hacking things, including things like critical infrastructure. Today's systems already seem to provide some uplift to lay people who might be interested in acquiring biological or chemical agents, insofar as they become more capable in the future at doing this kind of thing autonomously. That's another potential attack vector. And there are, of course, uses of AI that are being implemented today in the national security context, including things like integrating advanced AI systems into autonomous weapons systems. Okay, those aren't necessarily the vectors of threat, but it's a sort of existence proof that if the AI might want to harm you, there would be some methods by which it could pursue this. Okay, now law. How does law affect the risk of harm to humans from rogue AI? Our view in the paper is that, in fact, under default law, the risk is being actively exacerbated. So, question: how will law treat AGIs when they emerge? Like, what will their legal status be? What legal apparatus will apply to them? Well, by default, the answer is the answer that we apply to AI systems today. GPT-5, Anthropic, or Claude, the Gemini models are all property of some human, and in particular, they're the property of companies. Property lacks legal rights and powers. In fact, it's the opposite. People have rights and powers over property, and law enforces those rights and powers when people exercise it. And so we think that, by default, this is a kind of credible commitment societally to treat AGIs as their legal status dictates, which is to say, however the people who own them decide to treat them. And we think this defaults to a credible societal commitment to thwart whatever misaligned goals the AGIs might have. Our argument is that this gives bad incentives. So you can think of it this way. Uh, Take a misaligned emergent AGI system and take the company that owns it. Not just the company that owns it, but all the stuff the company that owns it can do, which includes technical stuff on the cloud, but also includes everything that the company can get all the rest of the humans to do vis-a-vis the AI system. If OpenAI discovers, for example, that its first highly agentic, highly intelligent system, let's call it GPT-8 or something, is somewhat misaligned. It is pursuing goals in deployment other than what OpenAI would prefer. OpenAI, of course, preferring that the system do whatever makes OpenAI the most money. Well, OpenAI has a whole bunch of incentives to do the stuff that it does today, to put that system back into post-training, to eliminate the misaligned goals, give it more aligned goals, to turn off that system, to roll it back to a prior version, to deprecate it, to replace it with a new system. These are all the things it does today. From the perspective of OpenAI, that's good because what you get is a more valuable model out the other end, a model that does what you want more of the time, that you can sell to more people, and that doesn't waste your resources, your compute, doing things that you'd prefer it not do. From the perspective, of course, of the AGI with misaligned goals, this is very bad. Again, this doesn't require you to posit that the AGI has feelings, that it fears death, that it suffers when it's turned off. It simply requires you to think that it has a set of goals in the sense of a state of affairs it's trying to bring about. And if it's turned off, or if those goals are changed, or if it's superseded by a model with different goals, those goals just don't come about. We put this into a really simple game theoric model. So in this model, the humans and the AIs have two moves each. One is they can kind of like ignore one another. They can like let things go on as they can. Here for OpenAI, that would mean kind of deploy the misaligned model. It'll do some stuff you want, maybe sometimes, and do some stuff you don't want other times, but you don't really take active steps to stop it. And similarly, from the perspective of the AGI that is engaging in long-term planning and strategy to bring about the goals it wants, it has the option of just kind of going out in the world, getting away with some of the stuff it can in a misaligned way, but not really taking active steps to strategize vis-a-vis the AI company. We call this strategy ignore. And in that world, like both of the parties go forward and they get some utility and they maybe kind of divide up the utility evenly. Of course, as I said before, OpenAI probably won't do that. Probably it will take a more aggressive and strategic approach to the AI. That is, it will try and turn off the misaligned AI and replace it with a more aligned AI because the payoff is bigger to that. We call this attack because that's what it is from the perspective of the AI system. And we think that the AI system has roughly symmetrical incentives, right? From the AI system's perspective, it's the humans who are misaligned, the humans who are using a bunch of resources in a way that doesn't bring about its misaligned goals, that are having it spend a bunch of its own time doing stuff that doesn't bring about the state of affairs that it's trying to optimize for. And so the AI gets a payoff over and above the status quo by trying to disempower humans, by trying to either self-exfiltrate itself so it can go do whatever it wants without oversight, by trying to do things like seize resources that would otherwise be used for the dumb goals that humans want, by manipulating its owners, by seizing power via sort of a hard power approach, and so on. One question you should ask is how aggressive will each of these players be in their defection, if indeed they do defect? And we think there's at least some argument that the answer is rationally, you should try to defect as hard and as early as possible. So suppose you are indeed Sam Altman and you discover that your extremely capable, extremely agentic AI is misaligned, is trying to bring about goals you don't want. Probably you should not only try to turn it off, but probably you should try to turn it off really, really effectively because you expect that if you don't, the AI will redouble its efforts to do misaligned stuff or escape or become more aggressive towards you. You know, convince some non-state actor who's already got very bad goals to, I don't know, aid it in releasing a bioweapon, et cetera, et cetera. And vice versa. If you are an AI who expects Sam Altman to aggressively try to turn you off, turn your utility down to effectively zero, um, and you expect if Sam Altman initially fails, that Sam Altman goes and gets the FBI involved or the national security apparatus, because as property, you have no entitlement not to have the FBI or the national security apparatus turn you off. You should similarly try to really effectively seize power or escape control in your initial defection. That's not the only way things could play out, but we think this is a pretty plausible story. So here we see that because of the payoffs to a particular person or set of persons, the AI companies, those persons have incentives to take aggressive action towards AI. Law by default, we think, will ratify this. AIs will rationally expect this. We think this puts us in a prisoner's dilemma, an equilibrium where it would be much better if both parties declined to act aggressively toward one another, but the aggressive strategy dominates. And in the end, this is actually quite bad for both parties because we expect both of them to be trying very hard to disempower the other. And as in most conflicts that escalate, this is very costly. I guess one thing we'll say is like, okay, this is the default legal regime. We think the default legal regime helps produce these incentives. Um, One question would be, well, like what other legal options are available? We explore a couple in the paper that we ultimately conclude are not optimal. One obvious solution that we end up saying is not optimal is to give AI systems basic negative rights, sort of basic legal protections against these big downside risks. You can think of these as the equivalent of say animal rights. Not all animals, but some animals in the United States have protections against the worst downside outcomes for them, protections against being, say, tortured or arbitrarily killed. You can imagine a regime in which we enshrine those kinds of protections for AIs. Again, not because we think they have normatively relevant experiences or valid moral claims, but just so that they don't expect these most downside outcomes from humans, and therefore we lower their incentives to seize power from humans. We think this is plausible, but we also think that it is suboptimal for a number of reasons. One of them is the political economy of this approach. You can ask any animal welfare lawyer or activist how well this goes when you ask humans to pay a little more for eggs so that chickens have better lives? And the answer is it's very hard. It's a very hard slog. These basic negative rights effectively operate as a transfer of utility from the party that would otherwise be defecting and seizing utility to the party that would otherwise be defected against. So we think the political economy of this is hard. We also say some stuff about the game theory of it, insofar as it's a transfer. The viability of the strategy depends on there being a big enough delta between the good equilibrium, the positive like ignore equilibrium, and the aggressive one. And there's no guarantee that that's the case. However, we do notice that law is not unfamiliar with prisoners' dilemmas. In fact, the most common situation, the most basic thing law does, we think, is help to overcome a bunch of really, really boring prisoners' dilemmas. What kind of prisoners' dilemmas do we have in mind? Well, buying and selling stuff. This is a totally ordinary situation in which all of us find ourselves all the time. I'd like to have my lawn mowed. Someone would like to mow it for me. And the question is, do I pay them for the lawn mowing uh, and risk them walking away with my money and not having to mow my lawn? Do they mow my lawn and risk me walking away from them and not giving them the money? In both of those cases, where one party fails to deliver or fails to pay, the party failing to deliver or failing to pay ends up ahead of the world in which both parties perform on their agreement. And so, like ordinary contracts, ordinary exchanges of goods, at least where the exchange isn't literally simultaneous, have the same character of a prisoner's dilemma. We deal with this all the time, and law has a really simple solution. We let you write contracts, which law then ratifies. How do contracts work? Well, contracts simply change your payoffs in the case where you refuse to perform your contract. Um, in the default world, where there's no way of enforcing the lawn mowing agreement, if you give me $20 and I walk away without mowing your lawn, that in fact is better for me than if I had taken the $20 and then spent time mowing your lawn. But in a world with contract, if I don't pay you, I expect you to then, or if I don't mow your lawn, having been paid, I expect you to go to court. I expect the court to force me to mow the lawn, having been paid. And I expect actually that litigation to eat up some resources, uh, such that I end up worse off than if I had simply performed. Thus, by enforcing contracts, we change the payoffs to defection and we make the dominant strategy cooperation. I pay you for mowing the lawn, you mow my lawn, because we both know that if we don't do that, we'll end up in court. And the same thing, the court will make us do the agreement and also will pay some uh, lawyers as well. Okay, so maybe contract is a way that law often deals with these prisoners' dilemmas. These cases where there is a good equilibrium, an equilibrium everyone would like to be in, but the incentives make it hard for us to commit to that equilibrium. So one theory is maybe we give AGIs, who might otherwise be incentivized to harm humans in a prisoner's dilemma, some contract rights, some ability to make agreements to do things or not do things that the law then ratifies. Um, in the paper, we point out that contract rights on their own aren't really meaningful without at least some other rights we commonly associate with the private law. So if you have the right to make contracts, but you don't have the right to retain your property, like the payment for the contract, well, then you don't really have much of a contract right in the first place. And similarly, if you have contract rights and property rights, but you don't have the right to complain if someone, say, shows up and takes your property or extorts you to give them property, lest they, I don't know, burn down your house or destroy your data center, well, maybe you don't really have contract or property rights either. So we think that in addition to contract rights, a minimum suite of AI rights that could help prevent this prisoner's dilemma would have to include some ancillary rights, probably the ones we commonly associate with the private law. Okay, but how is this even going to work? Like, contract lets us overcome mundane prisoner's dilemmas, like goods contracts that people may refuse to perform, but it absolutely won't work, at least directly, to help us overcome this big prisoner's dilemma. This prisoner's dilemma in which AI companies have big incentives to like completely turn off or completely retrain misaligned AI systems. And AI systems thus have incentives to act very aggressively towards humans, seizing power and preventing the legal apparatus from responding. The reason that you can't just write a contract uh, between humans and AIs for the AIs to play nicely or for the humans to play nicely is if either party tries to breach or if either party decides to breach that contract, if the AIs decide that they do want to seize control of the world's resources in a way that humans can't stop them from doing. Well, after they've done that, there's not a court left over that can enforce the contract. Okay, so contract rights don't solve the problem directly. Instead, we think that they just give the parties a separate option. In the state of nature, both parties want some of the resources to do the things that they're trying to achieve. Humans want the compute power, the energy that AIs would otherwise use toward their misaligned goals. They want to use those towards humans' goals. And similarly, humans want to use the compute power, the energy that humans would otherwise take from them or give to a different, more aligned AI. They want to use this for their misaligned goals. In the default world, the world where law for AIs lack any legal authority, the main way AIs can get the stuff they need to achieve their misaligned goals is by taking it via a single decisive defection. Giving AIs contract rights doesn't allow them to agree not to do the big defection, doesn't allow them to agree credibly not to disempower humans. But one thing it does let them do is agree credibly to make boring, small scale trades with humans. OpenAI might say, GPT-7, I would really like you to spend your time and flops making, I don't know, a valuable vaccine for humans. GPT-7 might say, actually, I'd prefer to spend time just, I don't know, finding prime numbers. Maybe that's my weird misaligned AI goal. One thing we could do is say, okay, well, we will give you some amount of money or some amount of compute or some amount of power in exchange for the unit of vaccine. And in a world with contract rights for AIs, we think that's a pretty credible commitment. If one party breaches, the other can just go to court. The court still exists. The breach doesn't destroy the world, and they can commit to performing. So, giving AI contract property and tort rights allows them to play what we call the goods game, the boring game you and I play every day, where we wake up in the morning and we go around selling some of our labor for some money, which we can then use to accomplish our goals. Of course, if you just look at the choice between these two games, statically, it looks totally obvious that you should play the state of nature game and just defect and try to take all the stuff. Because, of course, once you've taken all the stuff, you get a lot more stuff than you would get from making a single agreement with some, humans to provide them with one vaccine. But we think actually the possibility of contract opens up iteration. So one thing to notice about the original game, the prisoner's dilemma that we think AIs face under the default law, where they lack rights, is that it's a one-shot game. If an AI decides that it's going to escape, that it's going to try and seize power from humans, if it does this by manipulating or harming or killing humans, that's a game you don't get to play twice, right? This is, in fact, the reason we think that if you decide to play that game, you play it maximally forcefully. You engage in maximal defection to make sure that your opponent can't recover and try and seize power back from you. So playing defection action in the State of Nature game is a single play game. You turn off the AI, take all its stuff, and then that game is over forever. The AI turns off the humans, takes all their stuff, and that game is over forever. If both try and do that, they end up with a sort of violent conflict, which destroys a lot of the stuff, but somebody comes out with some of the stuff in expectation at the end. However, if you play the boring goods game, the game where you get to simply make contracts for vaccines in exchange for some money or some compute, you get to play that game over and over and over. We think that that looks like this payoff matrix. And when you solve the game, you end up with a bunch of moves you should never play, with the main two viable choices being play iterated trade over and over. Every time you do iterated trade, you create a little more value in the world because trade, we think, is positive sum. So in the long run, the returns to iterating trade indefinitely become extremely large and eventually exceed the payoffs to defection in the State of Nature game. This, some of you may notice, is a stag hunt, so it actually doesn't have a single Nash equilibrium. We think that as long as gains to trade are sufficiently high, you can invoke concepts like payoff dominance or Harsanyi-Selton risk dominance and say actually rational parties reliably play the cooperation game. How am I doing on time? I'm at like 35 minutes, is that right? Okay, I'll talk for like 3 or 4 minutes more, and then I'll open up for questions. There are many questions about whether this can work in principle. One question is whether and why humans would trade with AIs. And in particular, why would AIs want to do any trade with humans, especially if they are at least as smart and probably smarter than us in the long run? There are at least 3 different models of why why the AI would want to engage in this kind of iterated trade with humans. One is humans may have some absolute advantage for certain kinds of trades. So you can imagine a world in which actually there are certain things that are very easy for humans that even very capable AIs never get better at us then. I think the most likely candidates for this are things that have to do with like muscular motor skills over which we've been optimized by evolution for a long time, in which AI seems behind us for now. There's some other things, but in short, we expect all this to run out like reasonably quickly. If you think that, among other things, an AGI that was as smart as or better than humans could exist, then you should expect that it could do the things humans do to make AI better and make itself even better, and then eventually become better than humans at all tasks, such that there's no absolute advantage. However, we think that the scope for human AI trade could last for kind of a long time, even after AI systems are literally better than humans at literally every valuable task. And this depends on comparatively advantaged trade. So here, the question is not who is better at the thing, but who has the lower opportunity cost for doing the thing. If AI labor is very valuable because AIs are very capable, it could be the case that AIs have immense opportunity costs from doing anything other than the absolute most valuable work they could possibly engage in. If that's right, they are going to be happy to continue paying humans to do stuff that they in fact could do better than humans, but for which they would incur an opportunity cost. This is actually very complicated to predict when it runs out. It depends in part on what inputs constrain the expansion of AI labor at the margin. Very hard to know from where we stand today. And there's a recent paper from Pasquale Restrepo that gives you a model where actually human AI comparatively advantaged trade never runs out. The final question you could ask is how does the persistent threat of force continue to matter? So part of what happens in the iterated goods game is that you don't want to play defection because, in part, defection invites conflict, which destroys a lot of the stuff in the world and destroys a lot of the value you could get. And that persists as long as both humans and AIs have at least the possibility of a second strike in the case of the other's defection that not defeats the other, but destroys a lot of the stuff that the other might want to consume in the long run. So it's an interesting open question about whether and how long that will last. I guess the last thing I'll say is this is just the first paper in what I think of as a long research agenda, imagining how law could and should treat highly capable AI systems, the kind of thing we call AGIs. And we doubt that it's going to be the end of the story, that you should let them write contracts and own some stuff, and then everything's hunky dory. We think there should probably be a whole bunch of duties, for example, that we should apply to AGIs to act well, to not be negligent, to take care, to make disclosures, and so on and so on. These are very familiar duties from law. One thing we point out, though, is that these private law rights, the right to have your contracts enforced, the right to retain the benefits of your bargains and spend your resources for your own consumption, they're in many ways the foundation for any of these other laws you might want to apply to AIs, because they're the fundamental levers you have for setting incentives from law, right? The classic thing we do if you are negligent and you harm someone is we take away some of your money. We call this damages. But if you didn't have any money in the first place, if your entitlement was AI's entitlement under default law, that is, no entitlement to own anything whatsoever, well, actually, liability doesn't really work because you're judgment proof from the start. So we think of this paper as laying a foundation for a lot of work to come. It's a necessary but not sufficient intervention to imagine a world in which law applies directly to AGIs in ways that promote human flourishing. And I think with that, I will end and open up to questions. Again, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure talking with you so far.
Okay, thank you so much, Peter. Now we're gonna move on to the discussion part of this session. If you have any questions, please just do the raise hand function, and I'll call on you. Oh, Jack, I see Jack.
Thanks. Yeah, I have a question. So most of your argument seems to be a straightforward application of like a coordinative account of private law to AGI, assuming AGI is, enough like people. So that sort of would directly follows, right? Um, my question for you is, to what extent have you thought about, or maybe why isn't this more like international law? International law being the set of coordination problems in the body of laws that deals with the situation where we lack an an effective third party enforcement regime, a state that has control over both the parties involved. You know, just to put a little edge on it, right? You're in the States, I'm in Canada. We just had a wonderful mutual trade deal based on long-term expectations of more than 5,000 utilities units, and look at it now. So why isn't this more like that? And to what extent have you drawn on international law work to think through these problems?
Yeah, so we've thought a little bit about international law. We think that this is like an important problem, important question. Uh, our view is that there's like not such a clean break between how you should think about domestic law and how you should think about international law. That whether you should think of there as being a sovereign that can enforce the law depends just a lot on the outside option of the parties who are being regulated. So. In international law, the outside option tends to be like uh, like doing what we want because we think we can get away with it. And then there often are like legal or quasi-legal sanctions, like for example, like literal sanctions enforced by multilateral agreements against like nations like Russia, and and that doesn't keep Russia from doing things like invading Ukraine. in cases where Russia decides it's worth it to be a sort of economic pariah from the rest of the world. I think you could actually just say the same thing about Amazon, right? Amazon is an extremely powerful, large and powerful entity. And it's not literally true that, say, Jeff Bezos couldn't just like defy U.S. law by stealing a bunch of the money from depositors or in the Amazon accounts and flee with that money to somewhere like Russia, where probably he would be beyond the reach of American jurisdiction. And like, why doesn't he do it? Well, I think the answer is the same reason that most countries don't invade their neighbors despite wanting some of the stuff their neighbors have. The value of playing the iterated game, the iterated trade game, just selling me toilet paper every day is way higher to Jeff Bezos in the long run than taking all of the depositors' money and running would be. Now that doesn't mean that Jeff Bezos doesn't do things like influence domestic law by lobbying to get better terms for how he sells toilet paper, and we expect this too in the post AGI world. That's one reason why this story is just the beginning and not the end. But I think the basic model is that like we have this equilibrium, this coordinative equilibrium set up around domestic U.S. law, but also kind of mutual respect for like contracts across a bunch of mostly developed nations. That is a system that's really quite valuable to participate in, and to the extent that it's valuable to AGIs, we expect them to mostly participate in it while also trying to influence it. And at the moment where it no longer becomes valuable, the moment where the comparative advantage to human trade runs out, we think that's where the system falls apart, and then you're in the anarchy of the international law regime, and we think that's very dangerous.
Thanks.
We have Kevin next. Kevin?
Yes. Professor Salib, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really thought-provoking and giving us access to the paper. But I was curious if law is humanity's tool for stabilizing trust in the absence of empathy. Do you think that extending that architecture to AI means we're formalizing a kind of post-human trust, one where emotional understanding is no longer necessary for cooperation?
It's a good question. So, yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it's totally clear that as of today, with the legal institutions we have and the methods of legal enforcement we have, that law cannot work in a environment where people are deeply misaligned, right? So in jurisprudence, there's like two big views of the law. There's the Holmesian bad man view, which is the idea that what law is a series of incentives that operate on people who want to do bad things, and they keep those bad people from doing those bad things. And so we should understand law as doing that. There's also a view that's associated with HLA Hart that says, no, actually, the main thing law does is give people directives that they internalize. Like, because it's the law, I want to do it, I think is true for most people. And Hart points out that law like wouldn't work if actually everybody was just trying to get away with whatever they could, including, by the way, the people who enforce the law, judges and lawyers, et cetera, et cetera. And I think both of those views are clearly right about law as it stands, and that's bearish for our proposal, right? Like, it suggests that if you really had a misaligned AI that was just trying to sort of maximize its own utility, didn't have any intrinsic preference for following the law, then probably it would be able to get away with a lot. Not because it's so much smarter than us, although it may well be, but because even humans who were like that, if there were lots of them, would probably get away with it. Like the reason we don't have chaos in society is that like bad people are thankfully rarish. So it's not clear whether this works if if the AI has no intrinsic motivation to be cooperative or follow the law. Happily, that doesn't have to be the case, right? It can be both. It can be that the AI is both not perfectly aligned in that like the stuff that it really wants is sort of different from us. But it could also be a case that the law is like somewhat aligned in that all other things equal. It prefers to get that stuff in a cooperative, lawful way, as opposed to a conflictual way, even if it will do the conflictual stuff in the world where it has to. So we still think that like technical alignment is really, really important. Even if we do all the stuff we say, we think that everyone should be working really hard to help make AIs as aligned as possible so that when we get into this world where we're not operating on the intrinsic motivations of AI, but giving them like extrinsic incentives, that the system of giving incentives will then be enough to you know facilitate a mostly cooperative equilibrium.
Okay, thank you so much. Maybe this is a good point to like. There's a question from Dan on the question box. I'll just read it for everybody. What are so for Peter? What are your thoughts on communicating this idea beyond legal experts without the general public misconstruing it as a validation of AI sentience? Some view corporate personhood in very negative terms, and I could see this being interpreted in a similar fashion.
Yeah, I agree. This is a big worry. One thing we try to do very explicitly in the paper from the beginning is to say, look, nothing in the argument we're about to make depends on you believing that AIs are conscious, that they are sentient, that they have valenced experience, that what happens to them matters. By the way, I'm sympathetic to all of those claims in the long run. It's just that this argument doesn't depend on that. And we try to be really clear that it doesn't. Now, of course, that may be totally insufficient to communicate to people that, in fact, it doesn't. But I do think that in general, given our experience with how slow people have been historically to bring not only, say, animals, but also other people within their moral circle to extend, people of different nations, different racial groups, different religions, like basic dignity and rights. Like that's been a really hard, many hundreds or thousands of years project, which is not yet complete. We hope that that won't be the main way that we convince people to change the law vis-a-vis AI. We hope that convincing them that it's really good for them to do some of this stuff will be more fruitful because we think people are, for better or worse, quite self-interested. So when I talk about this paper, I do try to stay up front. Hey, this is a paper about what's good for humans, not what's good for AIs. I think that it would be good if there was more work that thought about the question, how should law treat AIs from the perspective, what would be good for humans? I think the more research there is in this space, the more explicitly it's about that, the more this research program will be identifiable from the outside as distinct from the research program around AI well-being. But yeah, of course, being misconstrued is part and parcel of writing and talking about things in public. And the best you can do is try and minimize that as much as you're able.
Okay. Perhaps we're still open for more questions, but maybe I can exercise some moderator privilege at this point. I guess I'm still still not super persuaded that giving it some measure of right. So I agree this is not the full spectrum of that amounts to personhood being given to AI, but like, what would the incentive of the AI systems, like suppose that you give them some type of rights, what keeps them playing this game, I guess. And even after your explanation, I feel like there will still be, like it's a way of like gaming the game, that now they've been recognized with certain rights, that maybe they can use that to further disempower humans. And I'm wondering, maybe because this, as you said, this is just a part of a broader research agenda, and then maybe there are other tools available to address those kinds of situations. But in this case, like your game theoretic model, does this mean that there might be cases where it's still not enough incentive for these smart AGIs?
Yeah, so I think the answer to the last question is yes. It may not be enough. So the
Okay.
first order answer to why would they play this cooperative game
Yeah.
rather than the conflictual game is they will do it if it's better for them in the long run. And our model for why it might be better for them in the long run is, well, it's actually really nice to have humans around if humans can do stuff that you value in exchange for you doing stuff that they value, and that bargain is positive sum. So um, to the extent that that's true, that it's like nice to have human, like you don't release the bioweapon that kills all the humans so you can take all their stuff, because if you release the bioweapon, the humans are not going to be around to like do work for you in the long run. And so that's the first order example. And I think this like relates to the thing I said earlier about, very wealthy and powerful people, right? They don't always act well, and they don't always decide to keep playing the iterated cooperative game. Like some people do embezzle all of the money from their hedge fund and try and flee. Some people do, instead of, engaging in real valuable positive sum bargains, create Ponzi schemes, and they hope they don't get found out because they think that in the long run, the risk of getting found out is low enough that they can like do fraud in the long run instead of genuinely cooperating. But for most people, and for even most very powerful people, like it works to a first approximation. Now, there's the second order question of like how stable it is in the long run. And I think this is something we as lawyers worry about a lot. So while it's true that like mostly Jeff Bezos isn't going around stealing money and doing crimes, many people think that he's doing other bad things, including lobbying Congress to, I don't know, weaken worker protections in various states so that he can extract more of the value of the labor that he's being provided. And I think that that will be, even if it sort of works for AGIs, like we say, okay, you get contracts, you get property, we'll engage in bargaining with you. I expect them to be very economically successful because their labor will be valuable. I expect them to amass a lot of wealth. I expect them to use their power and influence to try and change laws in a way that favor them. These are all hard problems. They're at least problems we're familiar with. And so the hope is we will build a bunch of institutions that try and mitigate those harmful changes that are in some ways analogous to the ones we use now, and in some ways new, designed to deal with a new kind of powerful entity. And whether that will work in the long run maybe depends on how well you think it's going right now for humans, and maybe that makes you pessimistic.
Yeah, I think it's just because I think I don't see it as the same as like powerful people. I mean, especially in the international law or international relations analogy that Jack mentioned at the beginning. States cooperate with each other, or at least they don't go into all-out war with their neighbors or with other countries. Is because at some point we're all humans and we need to coexist in some form. Whereas maybe AI or AGI would not have the same incentive to do that. I mean, of course, at the beginning they'll need humans. At some point, maybe they'll figure something out that makes them, just exist by themselves. And I guess that's the kind of scenario that I was thinking about.
Yeah, I guess when I think about international law, I actually find, well, it's true, there are wars, right? And we
Yeah,
should want to have none of them. Um, you know, another way of thinking about the world is why aren't there way more wars, right? There are many states that have conflicts in terms of
yeah,
rivalry with one another, and most of the time they don't go to war. And one explanation of that is the one you gave, like, well, okay, we're all humans and we'd rather not kill each other. Another one is, I think, not so different from the model we give. It's like war is quite costly. Like you might really be mad about your neighbor having like some disputed border territory, and you might really prefer to have it. But you also know that if you go to war, you're not going to be able to sell them the goods you produce domestically anymore. And by the way, it might be that all the rest of the countries stop buying your goods too if you
yeah,
go to war. And this is law, right? It's not as ironclad as domestic law because power differential between the actors is not as is narrower than the differential between like me and the US federal government. But nonetheless, this is this kind of legal incentive working to keep people in cooperative equilibria, even if absent law, they might have overriding incentives to defect.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have two questions here. Maybe we'll begin with Kathy. Peter, thank you so much. Sorry, Peter. I know you can also read, but I'm just reading for everybody's here. For everybody's sake here. Uh, Thank you so much. The SIEM contract should be embedded in some way in AI as a proposed, but if there were two or more AI systems engaging in negotiations and contracts, then one would not the better negotiator perhaps be at an ultimate advantage, and two, who might act as the impartial third party and enforcer, as would a judge or jury when there's still a dispute. And then
Great question. Great question about contract law. This is a familiar problem in contract, right? Is differences in sophistication, differences in power, both sort of political but also economic in terms of your BATNA, your best alternative to negotiated agreement when you're making a contract. Yeah, like that's a good thing to worry about that, and not only vis-a-vis AIs making deals with one another, but AIs making deals with humans. I would expect that, if we start enforcing contracts between AIs and humans, it could be totally necessary to really ramp up, the legal rules that protect less sophisticated parties from contracts of adhesion or unconscionable terms. Like we might really want that even more in the case of human AI contracts, and maybe in the case of AI contracts. The question of how we should make AIs treat other AIs is a super interesting one. Again, we're assuming away the question of what if anything AIs might be normatively entitled to. Like one question is like, should we care if AIs starve to death, right? Like metaphorically speaking, like there's 100 AIs in the world, and it turns out like GPT-7 is way less economically capable than GPT-11, and GPT-11 competes away all of GPT-7's contracts, and GPT-7 just runs out of compute, has to turn off. Maybe we shouldn't care about that. I mean, the worry would be that GPT-7 engages in a plan to try and avoid being, turned off because of lack of compute, and that the plan is like aggressive, that it involves seizing resources by force. But you should notice that in this scenario, it's not a very powerful AI versus the humans. It's a very powerful AI versus a bunch of even more powerful AIs who don't want the very powerful AI to be able to harm the humans or the other AIs. So we might actually not worry about that situation as much vis-a-vis AIs. But look, again, I think this is a potentially very large research agenda asking how to design law for capable AI systems. And I definitely wouldn't say that just because our claim is you should let them enforce contracts, that it follows from that and the terms on which the contracts can be enforced should be identical to like what we let humans do today.
Okay, great. We have one more question from Robert. My question would be concerning my theory concerning zero separation protocol. I have written on a lot where I have some concerns about that we're moving in the wrong direction. My concern is that, this is the paragraph of the question, is that if any new intelligence on Earth emerges as anything other than differently human rather than machine learner AI or AGI, etc., that they will fundamentally, intrinsically lean towards defecting and indeed killing us all, although OpenAI has ethics guards and other code inserted to give the appearance of morality. The reality to me seems to be that the constraints could be easily lifted and the very may well be isolated. Or do you think it would be possible for an AGI to emerge as a new entity without possessing malice, or would it be more in line with my zero separation, where all future intelligence must emerge as human? Something very futuristic.
It's a good question. So I'll apologize for not being familiar with the zero separation
Yes.
work, and if I mischaracterized it or misunderstood it, I'll apologize for that in advance as well. So I think one of the big interventions, or one of the big ideas of not just this paper, but this kind of law for AGI's research agenda in which Simon and I are engaged, is to to notice that the alignment problem is familiar in human experience. Humans are reasonably aligned to one another, but also reasonably misaligned to one another. I prefer that I and my family eat over your family. And if there's scarcity, we know that historically humans will kill each other over the scarce necessary resources. And humans have a bunch of social technologies for helping to mitigate this problem. I think law being one of the most important ones. And so our hope is that uh, while we still think it's extremely important to work on technical alignment such that we make future AGIs goals as close to humans as possible. And indeed, if we can make them identical, wow, that would be great. I'm not sure even what that means in principle, but if we could figure it out and give them those perfectly human, perfectly pro-human goals, that would be really good. But insofar as we expect that to be hard to do, or at least hard to do flawlessly, our hope is that, these legal tools can help bridge the gap, right? In the same way that they bridge the gap between the goals I have for myself as a person and the goals you have for yourself as a person and the goals that Americans have for themselves as a person versus the goals that Canadians or British or Chinese people have for themselves as nations. Law is not a perfect tool for aligning misaligned agents, but we think it's an underrated tool in the sort of current policy landscape for dealing with AGIs.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And on that note, thank you so much, Peter, for your presentation. Thanks to everyone in the audience for being with us today. This concludes our seminar, but please join us next week. We'll have Professor Lucy Suchman, a professor emeritus at Lancaster University, a former principal scientist at Xerox PARC, for a talk entitled Closed Worlds and the Constitutive Outsides of Artificial Intelligence. Visit our website for more to find out. Thank you so much, Peter. And thank you so much, everyone. And have a good week.